generation without a struggle. It does feel like we are in the midst of some kind of change. I've called it a Luther-esque reformation. I mean, we're on the way towards either a societal change, a cultural shift. Definitely Christianity in the West is going through a shift with church populations just being absolutely decimated. I think the last percentage I heard was claimed atheism rose from 12 to either 18 or 23%. But people are still extremely spiritually hungry. That's where I see the scriptural warnings of people are going to fall for how does it say it, like persuasive doctrine. I think people are at an extremely vulnerable place for seeking things if they're not grounded.
Welcome to the Days of Noah podcast, where we talk all things biblical, supernatural, and strange. We have a special episode to bring you this week. Jed Payne from the podcast Church and Other Drugs is going to join us today. We connected with Jed after hearing him a couple times on Blurry Creatures, a podcast that we reference quite often and review a lot of their shows. And so Jed is going to join us today and talk a bit about end times, about Nephilim, Genesis 6, Mike Heiser, and shout out to Mike Heiser and his family and friends this week. We lost Mike Heiser from this realm as he passed into the next last Monday, and we are just so thankful for Mike and all of his faithful work in unpacking the supernatural worldview that's in the Bible, that's often not taught and not understood by most Christians. And it's really just a paramount understanding to be able to give a better context for the biblical narrative that is unfortunately not being taught to a lot of church leaders, pastors, and the like. And so we're just so thankful for Dr. Mike Heiser for all of his faithful work, and we will miss him. And Jed Payne was fortunate enough to have Dr. Heiser on his show, Church and Other Drugs, several times. So if any of you have not listened to those episodes with Jed and Mike talking, they are well worth your time. So without further ado, let's bring on Jed.
Good morning. Well, no, I was going to say good morning. It's afternoon now.
Hey, what's up? Can y'all hear me?
Yeah, sound loud and clear.
Awesome.
How are you, guy?
I'm good. Just getting over having COVID.
Oh,
no.
how many times now?
4.
Oh my gosh, serious?
Yeah.
So, did you have the first one, Delta, then?
The
bad one?
Yes. Yep. And then I just had it in October.
Okay.
And the lady at the urgent care was like, yeah, you can get it every 90 days now. And I was like, oh, okay.
Oh my gosh.
So October was the second or the third time?
Third time.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Yikes. Yeah, I've had it twice. The Delta was nasty, kicked my butt. Well, so yeah, glad you could be here, man. Thanks for your time. And so I'm Pete, obviously.
All right.
And I'm up in Wisconsin. And that's my brother Luke. And he was raised here too, but he loves the South. So
hey, there you go.
So I'm just down the road from you. I'm in Hammond. We just got back from church,
okay.
so I'm in the middle of getting some food for the boys. But yeah, so
yeah, good old
very
Hammond.
Cool.
Yeah, you're real close.
Yeah, what'd you say, Luke? About 3 hours to Lafayette? Does that sound about right, Jed?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, something like that. Depends how
like
you
an
drive.
hour to Baton Rouge. No, it'd be like 2 hours.
Maybe 2.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm overdue for getting over there. Me and my wife were just talking about that. We need to get over to Lafayette and enjoy the good food out there and different things.
What church do you go to in Hammond?
Abundant Life Church. It's at the one of the I-55 before you get it. It's the first exit when you're coming south in the parish.
What's the pastor's name there?
Lloyd Blunt.
Okay. Because my ex-father-in-law was a pastor of a church in Hammond, so I was wondering if it was the same one. But I can't remember what church it was.
That's really cool.
Yep.
Yeah, so I've been here. A little background on me. Obviously, Pete said we grew up in Wisconsin. He's still up there. I joined the military after high school, and when I got out, I was working with the ministry in the Carolinas. Katrina hit in 2005, and I was kind of at a crossroads whether I was going to move or not, and helped out with some of the evacuees in Charlotte. You know, remember they were shuttling them, taking on planes all across the country. So I helped some of the evacuees in Charlotte, North Carolina. And then a church I was going to had ties down here. So I came down with a box truck and about 10 guys, 8 to 10 guys and gals, and we just came down to serve, you know.
Oh, nice.
And then I was like, you know what? I'm going to move here. So worked for about a week and a half, went back to the Carolinas, packed up my vehicle, which encompassed everything I owned, and as a single man, and moved down here. So rest is history. So I've been here since about mid-September 2005.
Yeah, that's exactly. I moved from the Carolinas. I moved from Columbia to Baton Rouge in July of 2005.
Wow.
July 27th.
Okay. Yeah, I was in upstate, so around Spartanburg, Gaffney area.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
All my family's in Pickens County, like
Okay.
Liberty.
And you said you came down to Louisiana, specifically Lafayette?
No,
Right away?
Then it was Baton Rouge.
Baton Rouge first. Okay. And what brought you down here?
Rehab.
Okay.
Yep. There was
Obviously part of your testimony then.
Yep. There was a long-term treatment center in Baton Rouge that I went to. That's why I moved down here. And I was only supposed to stay here for like 9 months, but here we are. 18, however many years later.
Man.
May I ask what rehab center it was?
It was called St. Christopher's.
Okay. The one that pops into my head is Teen Challenge. I'm sure you're familiar with David Wilkerson. I think he founded Teen Challenge. And then there's one notable minister, evangelist Stephen Hill, that had ties to the Brownsville revival in Pensacola. His testimony came out of Teen Challenge and rehab to become a minister. So,
okay.
Anyways. Yeah, I was stationed in Pensacola for a few years.
Oh, cool.
Well, that's my foundation. I'll let Pete give it a quick introduction, and we'd love to hear more from you.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, well, just real quick. That was that when Luke was in Pensacola, we were visiting him and got to see a little bit of that Brownsville revival, and that was really pivotal for me because like Luke and I both grew up Lutheran, and that was a good foundation, at least, for the head knowledge. But as you guys know, you got to make your faith your own at some point. And so that was really impactful for me. One night I saw Ray Comfort speak down there, and he had his Hell's Best Kept Secret teaching that I thought was really good. But yeah, so that was that was the turning point where I was like trying to make faith my own, and then I found a Vineyard church in the area here, I'm in a suburb just south of Madison, Wisconsin. And so we found a vineyard church, and they had like a worship band, and I was like, wow, people are playing live music and they actually want to be here. Like, this is cool. So, and I had been playing bass guitar for like, I don't know, like a year or something. I was like, I want to join. So I joined, and like a year after that, so I would play one week and I would sing the next week because I couldn't do both at the same time then. And then like the worship leader left with his family. He wanted to go to a church with like more things for his kids. And so suddenly I was thrown into like having to sing and play at the same time. And then I was learning how to do that. And so I've been in worship teams for like 25 years, but I don't want to take up a bunch of time talking about that. But anyway.
Oh, no, you're fine.
Yeah. So, yeah, well, this is awesome. So welcome, Jed Payne. And so you are the host of Church and Other Drugs, obviously, the podcast.
Yep.
And that's been going like, what, 6 years now?
Yeah.
That's incredible.
Well,
so
by last count, it was around 6 years. Just put out the 251st episode. So yeah, it's been a long time.
yes, you're a vet of that game for sure. And of course,
Yeah.
you know, Nate and Luke had you on one of their early episodes when they were getting going, and did you kind of help them start out a little bit, or?
Yeah, a little bit. So I got, well, I wouldn't say to help get them started out, but I definitely, so I knew Nate when he was doing the Don't Feed the Trolls podcast years ago with Matt McDonald. And so that's how we started talking. And then I had him on my show, and that's when I was like, oh, we have some kind of similar beliefs here because I wanted to talk to him about Bigfoot.
Yeah.
And then I kind of went on his show and turned him on to like Dr. Heiser and the whole divine council worldview and the Nephilim thing, and definitely nudged him in that direction. And then he went buck wild with it for sure.
Yeah, Luke and I were just talking before you got on, like trying to think of when we first discovered Mike Heiser and when maybe Nate and Luke got into the whole Genesis 6 Nephilim stuff. Because it sounded like, I was just talking to Luke about it, it sounded like when you had your first episode with them, when you were talking about the book of Enoch, that it was a little bit newer and fresher to them maybe at that time. I don't know how much they knew about it at that time, but
yeah, that's fine. That just made me think. I don't exactly know how I found, like I had Dr. Heiser on my show a few times. I can't it may have just been like the first people I started reading were like L.A. Marzulli and Gary Wayne, but I was looking for a more like grounded scholarly approach to it. And I think it had to have been just Google searching books, and like, you know, his name is in those circles. And then his website, Sitchin Was Wrong.
yes.
Yeah. So he's been in that culture, pretty prevalently for sure.
You know, come to think of it, maybe you might be jarring a memory here, but it might be Rob Skiba that I was getting into about 10 years ago that I think references Mike Heiser quite a bit. So I think that's where I got into it.
Maybe me too, because
Okay.
I remember seeing some early Rob Skiba YouTube videos.
Yes.
There was like one in particular of like one of his lecture series, and I think that might have been where he quoted Heiser.
I think so. Yeah, so we definitely want to, you know, take a moment or two here to honor him as he passed this last week, and just how inspirational I think he's been to each of us in different ways. But before we get to that, I really briefly wanted, maybe if you could share a little bit how you got into podcasting, and you don't have to rehash like your whole testimony or whatever, because I know you have a whole episode on kind of the process that you went through spiritually and then with addiction and stuff like that. But like, how did like your faith journey and struggles and all of that lead you to podcasting, and and things like that?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, I've struggled with both religion and addiction for my entire life. Mainly like religious legalism and a massive sense of spiritual guilt and shame from as long as I can remember. And so drugs for me entered the picture as almost an accidental cure to those feelings of guilt and shame. I just noticed, like when I was like a preteen and a teenager, just noticing that if I got high, I didn't have these feelings of guilt until I came down, and then I needed to get high again to cover up those feelings of guilt. And I got really caught in the cycle of extreme emotional repentance and like altar call and like, oh dear God, I'm so sorry, please forgive me, and then sinning again and then doing it again and again and again. I grew up in the youth group purity culture movement of the 90s and early 2000s. So I think, I took it did me a lot of good. I think it also reinforced some bad theology in my mind. And then, as addiction does, I just fell into the life of addiction and did that for many, 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 many years. I finally was able to achieve recovery in 2014. I had periods of recovery throughout this time, but kept relapsing. The most I would get was like a year. I think a year was the longest I'd had at that point. And at that point, when I finally, a few things happened. Number one, I was older. I was 27 at that time. And number two, I kind of really, throughout my addiction, I had always maintained, I guess you could call it cultural Christianity. I always had a belief in God. I always had a relationship with God, but my faith was not producing really any good fruit. So it's like I really had to look at the way I was living and say, like, okay, if you say like you believe these things, like your life isn't showing it. So maybe it's time to take a look at like what do I believe? And it's like, and you talked about like a point at which you have to make your faith your own. Yeah, like I had always kind of I had a bunch of answers I could regurgitate of like, what do you believe? Blah, 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 blah. Like, I believe this because the Bible says so, blah, blah, blah. And it was I just had a moment finally where it's like, you need to figure out like why you believe what you believe and like what do you believe. And so to connect it with podcasting, that's it was all a nice little perfect storm. I was working as a fiber optic internet splicing technician. So basically I would just drive around by myself for 8-9 hours a day and hook up people's houses to the internet. And so I would just listen to headphones nonstop, 9 hours a day. And so I just was digesting all of these different podcasts about faith and deconstruction and reconstruction and the Bible and theology and all this different stuff. And, I'm at the same time, I have, I guess what you could say, like, my Christian life on the one hand, and then I had my Alcoholics Anonymous, my recovery life on the other hand. And going to both of those different groups, being church and AA meetings, I realized that there was a great many things that the one could learn from the other.
Yeah.
There was a lot of things that AA does 1,000 times better than church. There's a lot of things that church does 1,000 times better than AA. And so I was like, why don't I make a podcast kind of discussing that intersectionality? And so that's pretty much the genesis of my show. And it's obviously gone through many incarnations since then. But that was the jumping off place for wanting to feel like I had something to say.
Right. And that's awesome. I mean, taking advantage of all those window time at work to be able to do that. I work with a few people that have 2 hours of commute every day, and I'm like, what do you do? Oh, I listen to music. I'm like, man, you could speak 7 languages by now, or you'd be a scholar. I don't know.
I know.
So that's just, I mean, especially in the age we live in, right? There's so much information out there. You could seriously. That's why I love guys like Mike Heiser, because they've done all this legwork. I don't have the patience and money to go to school like he did, but I can pick his brain.
Yeah, and I think my buddy and I were talking about this the other day. It's in the digital age, people forget that there is information that you can't look up online.
Right.
Not all,
yes.
All the information and the text in the world has not been disseminated to the digital realm.
That's
so it's
true.
People just assume that the only information out there is what you can pull up on Google. It's but there are, for all we know, there is a book with every answer to mankind just hidden away in some obscure Arabic library.
That is true. That's a good caveat to remember. I like to say, obviously apart from those that haven't been transcribed to the internet, I like to say the internet has the answers to everything out there, but you have to parse through it and figure those out, right? You're going to get 1,000 wrong answers, but there are right ones out there.
Right.
But
right.
yeah, no, so that's really cool about what you saw with AA versus church, and that's one of the things I wanted to ask you about. So maybe let's kind of jump to that for a moment. What were some of the things? I mean, I guess maybe the openness and the community of AA versus church being more passive, or what did you see that were the big things?
Yeah, that was definitely part of it. The camaraderie. Why did it sound like I'm pronouncing that wrong? the fellowship. Everyone was united by a common cause, or ideally, right? And the very presupposition of being in AA was that your life was so bad that you had to go to AA, right? So there was no, that guy's in here because he was doing so well in life that he decided to start going to this meeting, right? So
right.
Off jump, that everybody in there has messed up bad, and so there's that feeling that your worst experience could then become your greatest asset. Whereas in church, it's common to have that whole Sunday morning facade, right?
Yes.
People are going to ask you, how's your week? It's well, do you really want to know? Or do you just want me to say it's great, super blessed, brother, and move along? And it's just I encountered that when I was going through my divorce and I was on the worship team. And it's I know practically speaking, this wasn't the time or the place, but it's they started doing this thing that before we would practice, we would kind of go around, everybody would talk about their weeks. And everyone's just well, life's great, da 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 da. And I'm just well, my wife asked for a divorce, things aren't good. And it was just kind of they were okay,
let's move on.
Well, moving on. It was wow. All right, Wow. So I guess a readiness to admit struggle, because I know we are all struggling. Why can't we just admit that? I challenged my pastor on that sometimes, about why don't you talk about some of these things from the pulpit? And his response, which again, I can understand and there's some wisdom to it, was it's about reaching the broadest amount of people and the newcomer possible. And I was okay, I sort of understand that, which AA has that whole thing. It's their motto is it's about attraction rather than promotion. So I guess just the the realness of it is something I felt. And then on the other side, what I felt like AA needed from church was, and it's such an extremely unpopular opinion, but like the, God, that's what I felt like, because what I've noted, and once again, I understand the purpose, and I teach this purpose because there are people that have been so damaged by priests, by Catholic school, by church, by whatever, that if you say the word God, they are completely shut down. They're not hearing a single thing you're saying. They never will. So you kind of have to sneak around the back door and tell them about a higher power and kind of sprinkle some breadcrumbs to get them to accept God. But it's, from what I've seen, it just seems like I wish more people, I was like really subjective and hard to say. I was going to say like more people would find God, I guess, but it's like, who am I to say that? And to say that whatever they're doing is not working. But what I would see more often than not is like when people have a power greater than themselves, or like their own conception of God, which is in the AA literature, is more often than not the conception of God that they're going to realize looks a lot like themselves, just kind of like a higher version of themselves that doesn't. So it's kind of, subject to the whims and changes. Like there's no like bedrock of like, this is what this is. And it has certain attributes and characteristics. It's more like, today my God is this, tomorrow my God is this. And that just seems a little flimsy to me.
For sure. Yeah. And it's interesting too, like you mentioned, some people having kind of those shut off moments of, you mentioned certain terms or whatever. And I think that's one of the really unique things about like Blurry Creatures and your show is like able to bridge that gap. You think about, like, okay, a Bigfoot podcast or about giants or whatever, and like how much theology and Bible comes out of that. So you have people that are kind of fascinated by this topic, and now they're getting exposed to things biblically that they wouldn't otherwise. And I think that's one of the advantages. It's just kind of like thinking of Paul, I become all things to all people that I might save some, just kind of meeting people where they're at. But so what was it, or where did you come across, like, going back again, you're kind of absorbing all this podcasts and things while you're on your job and discovering Mike Heiser. So like, how did that like help shape your views, and why do you think that matters? And I want to get into in a little bit here, like Genesis 6 and Nephilim, and like what was interesting and why do you think that matters? But then more specifically, like how did Mike Heiser kind of shape that for you?
Sure. So that's the question I think about a lot too. So the beginnings of it were my interests in conspiracy theories. And it was kind of, have you ever read Behold a Pale Horse or heard of that book?
Ooh, I've heard of it.
Yeah. It's kind of like the anarchist cookbook for 80s, 90s conspiracy theorists. Like it's a lot of it's been disproven, but it really played a massive role in getting things like the Illuminati and Freemasons and that sort of thing into the zeitgeist for that generation. Right?
Okay.
So, I'm into these kind of conspiracies, and you have this idea of like this one world government or this shadow group that is secretly trying to take things over. And I had difficulty reconciling that with a Christian worldview. So how does a society of humans thwart an all-powerful God? How does that work? And when I followed that trail, Well, and the other piece that I had confusion about with looking at the world, like I'm always looking at the world in a macro way. Like I'm a big trying to understand what's going on person. And so seeing things like regions where there is constantly chaos and war and discord, and things like witchcraft and ghosts and spirits and Bigfoot and UFOs, and like how would they fit in a world supposedly controlled by an all-powerful God? How would that work? And when I found the story of Genesis 6 and the Nephilim and the giants, it, to me, answered every single one of those questions. Especially, I was like a student of mythology and Joseph Campbell too, and just looking basically how every culture and society and group throughout history, especially in terms of mythology and their stories of creation and gods and all that, everyone is basically telling the same story.
Right.
And to me, that speaks to an underlying truth. And so then it's like, all right, if there is a truth there, then how does that fit with Christianity? And lo and behold, through the Divine Council, Nephilim, Book of Enoch worldview, and Gilgamesh, and all these, I'm also big on humans don't make things up without a frame of reference. So everything that we conceive and make up comes from a reference point. And things like modern day superheroes, things like demigods, things like chimera, it's like perhaps there actually was something in history that inspired these things to be. And then if that is the case, if that's true, then once again, I'm going to try and see if there is a Judeo-Christian explanation for these things. And I was surprised to find out that there was.
Yeah, that's what's so fascinating, I think, like you're saying, is how much of this stuff is connected. Randall Carlson and Graham Hancock, getting so popular with their ancient apocalypse stuff, and it's like, yeah, the Bible and history speaks to this stuff. This is true.
I know they're so close too. It's like I
Yes.
wanted to, it's like even on like Graham Hancock would be like, we don't know how this is built, but like if you ask the people, they say that the gods helped build it. But like that can't be. It's like you're so close, man. Like why not? I mean, you're taking a ton of leaps. That seems like another leap as well.
Yeah, it's just like kind of mainstream thought, right? To say, well, we dismiss such and such out of hand at the outset, therefore we're only going to look at this possible set of answers. And it's, I think even, I forget who said it, but thinking of like the reformers and things like that in church history, when they looked at the supernatural view of Genesis 6, maybe you even said this, Jed, on one of your shows, I can't remember, but that, well, we can't imagine that angels mated with human women, therefore we're just going to dismiss it. That was their answer. We can't believe it, therefore it's silly, and we're going to move on. But yeah, and Luke was going to ask you too a little bit, kind of how maybe your views on like Nephilim and UFOs relate to current events.
Sure.
However, Luke, you wanted to phrase that, I guess.
No, that's fine. You did it for me.
Well, go ahead. I'm trying to set it up.
No, Jed, I think when you were with Nate and Luke on Blurry Creatures a few years ago, your main focus was on Genesis 6. And so I was really wanting to know, what have you researched? What are you doing now? What are you looking at as far as current events? Obviously, L.A. Mazzulli is really tapped into the Trail of the Nephilim and the UFO phenomenon the last few decades, and really current event type stuff. And obviously we've seen things with unexplained stuff just in the last few weeks here. And it's hit Tucker Carlson. It's more mainstream. And I'm just kind of, where are you tying into that with what you've researched and your understanding of how those connect?
Yeah, I ask myself that often lately. I really don't know. I don't know. Like, and I guess I'll have to, a lot of this will be thinking in real time, and I'll probably have to attack it from a few different angles. So I have, and it may be the contrarian in me, and since it is becoming just hyper popular to have this opinion, maybe that's just making me want to kind of back out of it. But I am wary of people like Marzulli and Gary Wayne, and I'm in the Gary Wayne Facebook group just to kind of like be a voice of reason, because people will, it's just, you can take it so far into, literally the post I always bring up was this lady was like, I just moved into a house and there's a checkerboard pattern in my kitchen. Should I be concerned that this was a Knights Templar worship site? And she was dead serious.
Wow.
And people in the comments answered her dead seriously. And I had to be like, this has gone too far. Like, this, not every triangle you see in the world is an Illuminati symbol.
Right.
And it can completely, and I made a big post in there the other day too, because all of it, now their big thing is let's be terrified about AI and all this stuff. And AI turned into a demon and talked to my son. And I just, this might kind of sum up a little bit of it, but I was like, listen, we say we believe in God, and I see nothing but fear mongering in here about like, what are y'all afraid of exactly? Like, do you think that God's going to lose? Is that what's like, what do you, I don't like, if anything, we should just be casually observing and mindful, but it's like, there's nothing to be afraid of. Like, you're not going to suddenly be deceived, and if you are, you know what I'm saying? And it's, if anything, going too far in that direction can be an absolute deception in and of itself. It's like, am I spending way more time gesticulating about, what if my neighbor has Nephilim bloodline, or am I going and bringing a brownie to my neighbor because he's sick? You know what I mean? So it's like, I want to be careful. On the other hand, there are, if like gun to my head, if you had to say like, what do I think is going on in the world? I would say currently that I do believe in the explanation of demonic forces given in Enoch, in that it is the disembodied spirits of the slain giants, the remnant that was left on the earth and like, interestingly, and this brings up a whole other subject, but in Enoch, the giants' request to Yahweh is like, look, if you don't let us remain, then we're not going to be able to do what you want, or like your will is not going to be worked out. And so it's like, what? So like, God is using these evil forces like for his ultimate will, which I guess has to make sense cosmologically, but that brings up a whole another can of worms of like, what do you do with that? But okay, so if there are evil, unclean spirits that remain on earth, how would they get things done? Through influence of humans. A fantastic, and it was very underlooked in my opinion, but in the movie Wonder Woman, if you happen to see that, did you see that?
Yeah, I did.
Okay. So the part where Ares, the god of war, is seen whispering into the ears of people like building nuclear bombs and chemical weapons during World War I. And I was like, that to me is a fantastic example of what could be happening. It's, you know, things like channeling or influencing humans to do things in the physical world that spirits cannot accomplish, right? Perhaps not like outright possession, but yes, definitely influencing things to go down the path of ruin. Aliens, I have no idea. I don't believe in aliens as a advanced, intelligent, separate species and races in the universe. I don't know why I don't. I just don't. If anything, I think it would be a perfect, and it almost does seem like we are being primed and pumped for some sort of revelation about aliens or some sort of first contact, or it seems like we're being set up and padded for that. And it's, if that ever happens, I'm not going to trust it, even in the slightest bit. I would like subscribe to the idea that it would be some kind of deception, that it would be some kind of trick, or like I'm way more like, I can totally get down with interdimensional beings. But as far as non-humanoid intelligent species in the universe, I just don't believe that for whatever reason. I do think there is something people are seeing. I do think that's, you know, but that could be a million things. It could be something going on with time. It could be, you know, dimensional rifts things. I was always super curious and interested into like the nuclear age and how Jack Parsons was involved with Aleister Crowley, and Aleister Crowley summoning Lamb, which just so happened to be the drawing of Lamb, is an alien gray, right? So this demonic being that he summoned, that's like the archetype of the alien grays. And so during this period of the 50s and 60s, when there were just hundreds of nuclear detonations on Earth, and some theories thinking that there was like, you know, that nuclear detonations create thin spots or veils or whatever. And from that period on is when we started getting more and more reports of UFO sightings and things like that. So right. I don't know.
Yeah.
Go ahead. You kind of hit on one of my next questions. Aleister Crowley and his summoning, him tapping into the spirit realm, and how this relates to Genesis 6 is, it's well known that Hitler and the Nazi party were deep into the occult. Mm-hmm. So they were aligned with Aleister Crowley, or maybe even used some of his teachings as an influence. And then, say, you know, if you want to reference it towards a movie, Raiders of the Lost Ark. So they saw this power and they were wanting to tap into this power, if possible, for their benefit. And there's been reports of Canaanite altars and other pagan ritual sites that the Nazi party has even used. I think there was a castle that was built on top of one, or they brought it in and then they built the castle on top of them. So I'm kind of seeing a parallel from Genesis 6 and this exchange of knowledge between the Watchers and what may have took place with this technology explosion that took place during that time that you referenced with the nuclear time, and then we're starting to see the rise of all this unexplained phenomena in the atmosphere, in the heavens. So it's like, was there an exchange of, is this kind of like a rebirth type of situation of Genesis 6 in a sense? Because it's I don't think people put enough thought into the fact that there has been more technological advancement in the last 50 years than in the previous 500. I mean, it's just like the exponential rate is just insane, and
seemingly just kind of manifested out of nowhere. And there's even throughout history, there's still like sprinklings of that. Like there's lore that Da Vinci went into a cave for 3 days, and when he came out of that cave after having an experience, that's when he started his inventions and all his so there's all these in the ancient secret societies of knowledge, and it's like this. I mean, that's the other part of the Genesis 6 story that just makes so much sense to me. And even in the anthropology classes that I've taken at college and university, it's just like it does not make any sense to me at all. It's just like okay, so the entirety of the human race is just like, oh, yeah, they just figured it out. Like literally, it's just like enough of them tried enough things enough times, and they just figured it out. And it's like that does not work for everything. It just doesn't. I mean, especially with things like drugs. Like this is another example I always use, like ayahuasca, right? To produce ayahuasca, you have to take a vine, and then you need the problem with DMT is that it is broken down in the body by monoamine oxidase. So what you need is a monoamine oxidase inhibitor to take that concurrently so that your body does not break down the DMT. So you need 2 separate plants out of trillions in the Amazon, trillions of species. You need to find 2 that work together to produce this thing. And so you're telling me, and it's not like you have to prepare them. So it's like, so one person one day just grabbed the right 2 plants to make this thing? What are you talking about?
Yeah, it takes more faith to believe that kind of stuff happened by chance.
It really does.
And same with, And see, maybe this is the framework of mindset that our educational system has cranked out, right? Because we're teaching people, give it billions of years and life can come from non-life. And so they go, oh, okay, as long as it has enough time. And same thing like you're saying, yeah, people will just trial and error, take deadly mushrooms, and figure out which ones aren't and that make you high. It's like, what? They're not going to do that.
The Occam, like and also I do not believe that human, like in the dumb human thing, that like we started dumb and we've just been getting smarter. It's like, no, I'm pretty sure we've been the same the entire time. If anything, we were smarter. And I believe what they said. So it's like when they say, hey, how did you learn how to build this stuff? Oh, the gods told us. Oh, scholars are like, you silly primitive humans, that can't be right. And it's like, why not?
Right.
Why not? What was the original claim that a human could make that would allow him to be a king? Okay. It's like in the development of humanity and societies, like, if I'm bigger than you, I'm just going to beat you up and now I'm king, right? Unless this person is backed by a god, right? And claims, I mean, that was what the original monarchs had claim to, was they had this blood that was semi-divine.
Right.
And so that was respected enough that people were like, oh yeah, you're the king, with no question. Otherwise, if there's only 100, at one point, 1,000, 10,000 humans on Earth, what gives one right to say like, oh, this is mine? It's like, well, I'm stronger than you, so now it's mine. And then the other guy's like, oh, I'm stronger than you, now it's mine. It's like, these bloodlines had claim back then. There's just a lot of things in humanity, to me, in human history, that don't make sense outside of some wacky supernatural stuff.
Right.
I mean, it just doesn't.
So where do you tying that into kind of Luke's question for the current events and then into the future, because when I listened to one of your episodes with Brian Godawa, and he comes from kind of that preterist eschatology, right? That Revelation has largely been fulfilled, and that really made me dig in the last few weeks to figure out where I land on that, because it's like our podcast we call The Days of Noah, because we're kind of taking that view that as in the days of Noah, where, you know, there was hybridization going on with Nephilim and cross species, you know, things going on, that the earth became so corrupt that God had to send the flood, that these kinds of things are going to come back in the end times. And when I listened to Brian Godawa, I was kind of like, I need to dig into this. And so I've kind of come up with some sort of a system of understanding that this already not yet idea that Mike Heiser has talked about. But where do you see that kind of in your maybe evolution of eschatology, and what you see, you know, Satan is up to, basically? Like, some people are saying, you know, he's building an army, he's outnumbered 2-1, and he's, you know, if you've ever heard of, like, you know, the Nephilim mothers and well, the alien abduction thing, right? With breeding, that there is a program underway to kind of do what he did back then.
So Godawa challenged me on that too. And someone else, I was digging into Revelation 2, and I remember that being a huge bombshell. Just I'd never even really heard that idea that the apocalypse of Revelation occurred in 70 AD, that it was the destruction of, and I was like, okay, well, that actually tracks, because if the author was saying, yo, this is happening soon, then
right,
he was way off.
Yeah.
Right. You know, way off. It did seem to be extremely immediate. That being said, I also do like it seems to me a lot of scripture is archetypal, like, which is part of just the absolute genius of all the writings. So, you know, like the Jewish people in general are, if you take their struggles as a people, it's me. It's like, how often has God delivered me from bondage? And I'm like, oh, thank you, God, for hearing my cry. And then I go worship an altar immediately. And then God's like, okay, here you go, you dumb kid. I'm going to make you go. You know, we've all had our wandering in the wilderness for 40 years. So if those things are true, if we can look at scripture that way, then I think Revelation probably does speak a truth about our future. And it seems like, you know, there are ages in humanity, and they are all met with cataclysm or restarted. And it's, you know, what I would be curious to know is, you know, because we feel like we are in and I'm with you. I feel like things seem to be getting horrendous. But how did the people in 1946 feel? You know,
yeah.
Like, how did people during the bubonic plague feel?
Right.
How did people during Armenian genocide? I mean, there have been so many other times in history when it was worse. You know, it was worse by all categories. So it's like, is that just every generation thinking that they're living in the end times? And you know, I grew up, you know, reading the Left Behind series.
Yes,
and,
exactly.
You know, just being like, yes, all right.
Wow.
Here it comes.
Ooh, watch out for this slick Antichrist. He's going to be a smooth
yes,
talker.
Man. Yes. But so what I do, and this is, you know, a pet theory, this is just speculation. To me, it does seem like we are it seems like there is a force of Antichrist moving through Western evangelical Christianity. I feel it seems like lines are being drawn and people are being kind of separated. And I think that's a good thing, because I think we've been far too comfortable and far too, America is really, we are blessed enough to be so situated that you can set up a life where you don't need God.
Right.
Right. You can be so comfortable and so well off that you have no use for God.
Yeah.
And you can just go on Sunday and thank God for your wonderful life and your 2 kids and your house and your boat. And you just live a 80 years and you die. And that was it. And I think that's dangerous. I think that's super dangerous. And I think it leads to a life of spiritual mediocrity. And I think we're missing out on things. So I think we're past time for like a purifying fire, like a galvanization, a shakeup. Absolutely. Yeah. And it's, scripture talks about that all the time.
Well, do you think it's kind of what Revelation talks about, the great falling away? And do you feel like that separation, in a sense, being a good thing, is kind of like the sheep and the goats kind of thing?
Yeah. And I guess we could argue good thing might be a
good
necessary, might be better.
Yeah. Right.
Because over and over, I mean, Jesus uses metaphors of separation, wheat from the chaff, brother against brother. One will be plowing the field, one will be taken. I mean, just goat and the sheep, just all these examples of separation. And so there is some people, so that implies that like some people are getting it wrong. And it's like, if your beliefs are never challenged, then you have no need to back them up. And they just become rote answers,
Yeah, well, one of the things you said once was if you take the supernatural out of Christianity, it just becomes a self-help philosophy. Mm-hmm. I'm probably paraphrasing you there, but
and that's again what I see. The biggest ills I see right now facing the bride are celebrity pastors. Televangelists have always been a thing. They always will be a thing. I pity people like Kenneth Copeland, because I just, the strongest warnings in scripture are for people that lead Christians astray, like abuse of power. And so it's almost just like, I am terrified for you. But you have celebrity pastor, and you have, the 5 keys to having a better work week. Right. It's like, I think we need to, be taught scripture and like wrestle with these, we need to face the criticisms head on. We need to face the challenges and critiques head on and really wrestle with these things and dive into, like, I'm at a point in my life where I want to be taught the scriptures. I don't want to be taught how to not feel sad on Tuesday. Yes. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Like and I'm hoping, I do see a lot of churches are doing that extremely well. Like, I always plug Woodland Hills Church, and Greg Boyd is the pastor there. Like,
okay.
I love his stuff. And my parents' church in Columbia Presbyterian, they do it really well. So like it's happening.
Yeah. What do you think? Are you familiar at all with some of the organic church movement, or like Frank Viola's book, Pagan Christianity, kind of unpacking the baggage that the church has added over the last 1,700 years?
Oh, I've never heard of that.
Yeah, so that stuff I've been getting into more lately. Not to go off on a rabbit trail there personally, but I think that speaking to that kind of apostasy, falling away, really solidifying what we believe, like we've been largely passive. We show up on a Sunday morning and we let a few people use their gifts while our gifts are not very active in those moments. And so I think there's a lot of things that people need to take personal responsibility for their faith, that we're soft and flabby, right? We're comfortable. And what is the pattern of like society? I forget where it comes from, right? Where there's revolution and then freedom and then prosperity and then apathy, and then you lose your freedom. Like the whole cycle starts all over again, right?
We're a generation without a struggle. I mean, so the part of me that feels like we are approaching some, I do, and other people do too. It does feel like we are in the midst of some kind of change. Mm-hmm. I've called it a Luther-esque reformation. I mean, we're on the way towards either a societal change, a cultural shift. Definitely, Christianity in the West is going through a shift with church populations just being absolutely decimated.
Oh, yeah.
People, I think the last percentage I heard was claimed atheism rose from 12 to either 18 or 23%,
wow,
which is a humongous change. And I think that was from like 2008 till now or something like that.
Wow.
Yeah. So but people are still extremely spiritually hungry. So It's like everyone's kind of shooting their tendrils out to these, and so that's where I see the scriptural warnings of people are going to fall for, how does it say it? Like persuasive,
right?
Doctrine
and signs and wonders and different things.
Yes. It's I think people are at an extremely vulnerable place for seeking things if they're not
grounded.
If they're not grounded. Yeah.
I think it's one of such the amazing thing about Mike Heiser is, going to these UFO conferences and finding people that are more interested in how this ties to history and the Bible than people in church. And that's one of the things I was going to ask you real quick about is what kinds of responses do you get when you talk about Genesis 6 and Enoch and Nephilim from Christians, and what kind of response you get from non-Christians, and how is that different at all?
So from non-Christians, probably a amused fascination. Most of the non-Christians that I'm friends with or associate these days are either like they've gone so many different directions, like humanist or moralists or New Age, Wiccan, that sort of thing. So it's either these people believe in things like gods and goddesses, but they do not think that they're malevolent, or they think the supernatural is silly, but they believe in aliens for sure, without a shadow of a doubt, or they think the supernatural. Yeah, that a lot. Wow. That I see a lot, which is so funny to me. It's like, okay,
they embrace that idea of intelligent
absolutely
life. Okay,
yeah, almost as a scientific fact, like it's as a statistical impossibility that it is not true, or there, at least I try to get people to agree to, it's like either if as far as creation arguments go, if you believe in a creator or the Big Bang, both of them take equal measures of faith.
Right.
Both of them are absolutely ridiculous if you take them at face value.
Right.
It's, so if we can agree on that.
Yeah.
And then with Christians, I either get the Christian that has really watered down the supernatural message as hyperbole or metaphor, or the beliefs of an ancient Near Eastern people group, and to be thought of as, teaching and life lessons. And, well, of course that's what they believe because they're silly ancient peoples. Or, people are like, yes, that makes sense. And then people, I guess, more like my parents, I don't know, they definitely believe in, it's funny too, and this is what I don't get. It's like most whatever, I paint with a broad brush a lot. Most Christians, no problem, except, the concepts like the devil, demons, angels. Okay. But so why then is it crazy to think that this story happened, or at least admit that that is what the readers of the Bible thought back then? Everyone just took it for granted that was the truth.
Yeah, that's one of the ways that I was trying to dig in myself when I was getting into Blurry Creatures and got inspired to do our own thing based on that was, okay, I need to understand why the Book of Enoch is important, even if it's not canon. Yeah. And Mike Heiser recommended a scholarly work based on her dissertation by Annette Yoshiko Reed, where she documents basically how Enoch was treated over like 1,500 years. And that's what they thought of it. And I think it's really, really a shame how our seminaries are cranking out pastors who are taught this Sethite view of Genesis 6, and we're gutting the Bible of its context, and now we don't have a proper response to the atheist that says, your God's a genocidal maniac, and how could he have done this? It's like, these are the answers right here, and we're not learning it.
Right. That's the thing. Yes, that's the thing too. Is it answers so many of the issues, but and so I guess largely, I guess I have learned to maybe I'm just getting older, to stay out of like raw debate, and just kind of keep doing my research and talking to people that will continue to like open my mind about it.
Right. It's kind of like a bee. You fly from flower to flower. If it's not open, you buzz off, right? It's like not everybody's gonna be into that. Yeah, I think that's wise. And I can tell you from we're only on episode 17 here, but just from doing this, like how much more it's challenged me to dig in and be sure, at least know why I come to conclusions that I do. If I'm going to actually talk about it, even if there's 3 people listening, I need to kind of know what I'm doing. But so
awesome.
One of the last things I just wanted to do, kind of on a lighter note, is what's a favorite moment of with Nate and Luke on Blurry Creatures, and I'll share real quick mine with you, because one of your episodes you blurt out, did you know people have stripes? And then there's like a pregnant pause. Do you remember this?
I don't remember the content. I remember learning that fact though.
No, but so you
to tell everyone.
You said it on the show with Luke and Nate, and then there's like this pregnant pause, and then real quiet you can hear Luke go, "What?" and then you explain yourself. But I just love how you let it hang out there. So.
I just love giving Luke a hard time about his famous family. I'll leave it at that.
Oh, okay. Okay, nice. All right, I'll have to dig into that. I can't remember the context for that one, but
yeah, I'll tell you afterwards.
Sounds good. And then and so we could probably wrap up here in a minute, but so tell us a little bit about kind of what you're doing ministry-wise, counseling. I know you were going to school for helping people. Are you finished with that? Are you in the middle of that, or what's going on?
Yeah, so I work as a substance abuse counselor. I work with the courts right now, doing groups, kind of like a pre-trial intervention sort of thing for people. And I am in school to get eventually my master's degree in counseling.
Very nice.
So that's pretty much what I'm doing right now.
That's awesome.
And then running the podcast.
Yeah. Well, that's cool. Well, I look back in my life and kind of these, JOB that I had to pay the bills, right? And like, it's awesome when you can find just a little piece of maybe how God's wired you in some small way. And I'm still trying to find that in my vocation. At least, Luke and I, with doing our show here, we've got something that we get excited about that maybe we can kind of help people understand some weird topics a little better and how they relate to the Bible. But yeah. So it's awesome what you're doing, what you've been doing now for 6+ years, and then of course with counseling and stuff. So
absolutely.
Very cool. Well, thanks so much, Jed, for your time and for coming on, and hopefully we can maybe do it again sometime. And
sure. And, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So with that, Jed Payne, Church and Other Drugs, make sure to check out his show, and we will see you next week.
All righty.
Thanks for listening to the Days of Noah podcast. As always, please remember to like, share, subscribe, and follow our work on whatever podcast platform you prefer. Thanks for being with us. We appreciate each and every listener. Don't forget to check out Jed Payne's podcast, Church and Other Drugs. If you'd like to reach out to Luke or myself with any questions, comments, or ideas for the show, as well as any guest recommendations, feel free to email us at thedaysofnoahpodcast@gmail.com. We will see you all next week. Take care and God bless.